From handcrafted Steinway pianos in New York City and Copper River King salmon from Alaska, to hand-forged Damascus knives in New England and Cuban link chains from Miami, we're taking you on a road trip across the USA to uncover the stories behind some of America's most valuable items. Our first stop is the Stetson factory in Garland, Texas, where the iconic cowboy hats are still produced the old-fashioned way. It's a quintessentially American accessory that's been worn by the likes of President Ronald Reagan and Beyoncé.
A Stetson cowboy hat is stretched, shrunk, and submerged in water before it fully takes form. Those are only a few stages in the 2-day process that can make these hats so costly. You won't find the popular Skyline style for less than $245 on Stetson's website. That's little compared to this one, which will set you back $5,000. But it's not just how these hats are made. Stetson is one of the few hat brands that have reached icon status. So what made Stetson so iconic? And is that why these hats are so expensive? Producing a Stetson cowboy hat is a complicated and costly process. The production begins here, in Garland, Texas, where workers turn fur into felt. Stetson says it's one of the few cowboy hat makers in the US that makes hat bodies from scratch. This means it buys its own raw fur pelts and processes them into felt, compared to some other companies that buy pre-made hat bodies with the fur already blended. Fur is the biggest indicator of quality, and therefore has the biggest impact on price. In the fur room, Stetson stores fur from Portugal, New Jersey, Belgium, and Ukraine.
Okay, this is some of our natural beaver. Of course, this is the finer beaver hats are made out of natural beaver. Very tight fur, very durable fur. Good for all the weather, rain, nice feel.
This kind of fur isn't cheap. Just 1 pound of beaver fur can cost $125, and chinchilla fur can cost 4 times the price. Now consider that Stetson only produces about 2 hats per pound of fur. After the different furs are mixed together, the blend goes through a blower, which separates long hair from down. Stetson uses down fur because it produces a stronger felt. The machines in the factory are crucial, but the job couldn't be done without trained workers. The company employs more than 200 workers at 2 factories to guide the hats through each stage, another element that ultimately impacts the price.
About 100 sets of hands touch every single one of our hats as of right now.
Workers pass the felt through several stages of shrinking until the proper hat size is reached. Later, during the tipping stage, a worker helps create the crown by stretching and pulling the hat. Then, as an employee turns the felt, brass fingers of another machine push the bottom out to form the brim. One of the last stages of producing the hat body happens here at the forming machine, where the hat is submerged in hot water. An employee pushes down the former, and out comes the final hat body. At the finishing factory, machines taper and shape the crown of the hat, but the next few stages require special attention. Even as a machine sands the hat, an employee again must be there to guide and feel it. The worker will decide when it has reached the proper thickness. At other stations, craftspeople use scissors and pliers to secure the buckle accent. Others cut and sew on the leather strap by hand, then the inner satin lining. No hat makes it out of the factory without a final quality inspection. All hats go through roughly the same process, but premium ones have a few more features that impact the final cost. At $5,005, the Diamante Premier hat is one of the most expensive cowboy hats you can buy. It's made with 2 high-quality furs, chinchilla, and beaver. There's also the addition of the 14-karat gold buckle set, which can add $1,000 to the cost of a hat. Quality is only one reason Stetson has the confidence to make a hat like this and be sure customers will buy it. To understand the other piece of the puzzle, you have to go back to Stetson's beginning, more than 150 years ago. The founder, John Batterson Stetson, is often credited with inventing the modern-day cowboy hat and setting the precedent for what this style should be.
There are many replicas of the Burberry trench coat, but they were the original, and they sort of set the industry standard for that specific product. And I think Stetson has also done the very similar thing, where they have set a precedent with the celebrities, the politicians, wearing the hat and giving it that added value of, yes, this is a luxury piece.
In the late 1800s, sharpshooter Annie Oakley became one of the first famous figures to don the hat. In fact, in 2012, a Stetson hat worn by Oakley sold at auction for just over $17,000. While Stetson saw a dip in popularity in the 60s, demand picked back up in the early 80s, reignited by the release of the Indiana Jones movies. The hat reached the heads of other famous figures, like President Ronald Reagan, around this time too. But by the 21st century, the kind of famous face wearing a Stetson had changed. Dua Lipa's 2021 video for Love Again opens on a shot of a floating Stetson, then a shot of the singer looking stylish and seductive while wearing the hat. And here are two more notable examples that show how Stetson has linked itself with high status. There's Gigi Hadid holding a Stetson hat in this Vogue shoot in 2018, and 3 years later, Beyoncé wearing Stetson on the cover of Harper's Bazaar in September 2021. Both prove again how the brand has evolved to something worthy of being worn by the world's biggest names.
If you idolize those musicians, you're going to want to wear the brands that they wear.
It takes about 11 months to craft just one Steinway & Sons grand piano, and these instruments don't come cheap. A Model D concert piano in ebony, the most affordable finish of any Steinway piano, will cost you about $187,000. But that's nowhere near how high prices can reach. Steinway has produced two of the most expensive pianos in the world, worth over $2 million each. The next most expensive piano is half the price, at $1.2 million. But with several other premium pianos on the market, is there something about Steinway's sound that stands out? And is that what makes these pianos so expensive? Named the Rolls-Royce of pianos by the BBC, Steinway has produced some of the most sought-after grand pianos for over 160 years. It's the piano of choice for Billy Joel, Lang Lang, and many other professional musicians. But compared to other high-end piano makers, it's often Steinway's sound that sets it apart.
As a performer, I can wear many different masks depending on the piece that I'm playing. There's some pieces you want to be very, very diabolical, and Liszt, And at the same time, lightness.
Creating that sound starts here in New York, at one of only 2 Steinway factories in the world. Each grand piano is 5 to 9 feet long and weighs between 540 and 990 pounds. Often, the bigger the piano, the pricier it will be. About 85% of a Steinway piano is made of wood, and one of the most crucial woods is used for the soundboard.
The soundboard is the life of the instrument, the soul of the instrument. This is Alaskan Sitka spruce. This is the most expensive wood that we have in the piano, and we actually get it from the trees primarily that are on the shady side, the north-facing side of these islands. So they grow very little each year, and that means that we have growth rings that are very close together, not spaced apart.
Sitka spruce is used in other stringed instruments like guitars, and it grows in a few areas in the northwest US. But more than 50% of the Alaskan Sitka spruce they source won't meet Steinway standards. The wood must have a very specific grain density and direction, both which can impact the quality of sound. Steinway looks for closely packed, straight grains, no more than plus or minus 15 degrees off a 90-degree vertical grain. There's a reason it's so strict about this. It's partly why, when you press a key on a Steinway piano, you hear a distinctly long, sustained tone. The soundboard's edge must attach perfectly to the piano's rim, the curved wooden frame of the instrument. The full rim is made up of an inner and outer rim. Some piano makers attach each of these pieces separately, but at Steinway, a team of artisans bends both together. Steinway says this method gives the piano a stronger foundation, lowering the chances it will break. Steinway uses hard rock maple for both the inner and outer rims. The key here is to use wood that will, again, allow sound to flow freely.
Some companies, as an example, will have hard rock maple for the outside rim, but the inside rim, to save money, they'll use something like Luan. Luan is not as dense and hard as hard rock maple. And when you have your sound waves in that soundboard, some of them are being absorbed a little bit by that Luan, more than they would be by hard rock maple.
The consistent touch of the keys is another valuable element unique to each Steinway piano. There are just 2 artisans in the entire factory trusted with weighing off all 88 keys of every keyboard. This ensures each key is balanced, so a pianist won't have to use more force to press one key over another.
I used to dream about the pianos chasing me. Now it's not a problem. It's up to they the boss. I listen, I pay attention to what it wants. That's the key to it, is pay attention and watch that hammer. That's the key to it.
Each key is connected to a felt hammer. When pressed, the hammer strikes the strings to create sound. A key shouldn't respond to the finger's touch too quickly or too slowly.
So when I go to check the return, it stays. You see the hesitation? It's no good. That means it'll stay up in the piano. You see how fast that one is? That's too fast. So I take this one away. Then I put this one back, and it wants the small one. You see? So I put the small one. You see how nice it is? And that tells me what it wants. So that shows you the difference. Everyone is different.
One of the most difficult jobs is the final tone inspection. The goal is to create a balanced tone throughout the piano by slightly adjusting the hammers as needed.
From note to note, we can soften or harden these mallets, or hammers as we call them, and balance the sound that they generate into the string.
The quality of a piano's tone is incredibly nuanced, something only an experienced ear can decipher.
Well, if I take this note and then soften it, in this case I will put a needle in the hammer to soften it, then you'll hear that tone change. It's a little bit smaller. And in increments, small steps, I can go through and find the notes that are too big, too bright, and step them down. Well, I'm 58, and I started when I was 28, so that's 30 years and counting. I'm still learning how to do this. It never stops.
Like the ways you can customize a Rolls-Royce car, you can do similarly with a Steinway piano. Depending on special editions, veneers, and wood finishes, prices for a single piece can reach $500,000, like these pianos designed for Steinway by Lenny Kravitz. In the piano vault underneath the factory, Steinway houses one of the most expensive pianos it's ever produced, worth $2.5 million. On average, the price of a new Steinway piano increases about 4% every year. This is partly because the cost of Alaskan Sitka spruce increases at a higher rate than inflation, according to Steinway. And while the new pieces get more expensive, old ones become more valuable too. A Steinway piano can last several decades with the required touch-ups and restorations. A 1965 Steinway Model D piano is worth over $98,000 today. That's more than 13 times what it likely sold for. And although there are several elements that greatly impact the price, it's the musician who ultimately decides what the piano is worth to them.
This is a Damascus knife. Master bladesmith Zach Jonas is twisting a fusion of steels to make one of its trademark swirl patterns. But these unique swirls are more than just decorative. Successfully welding dozens or even thousands of steel layers creates some of the strongest and sharpest knives money can buy. What starts as individual layers of two different alloys transforms into this. A 7-inch chef's knife that retails for $700. Some of Zach's knives cost $5,000, and commissions can reach well over $17,000. So how are swirl patterns made from steel? And why are Damascus knives so expensive?
What people tend to notice right away when looking at Damascus is that visual pattern, and it ranges from very, very bold and big layers to very, very fine and shimmery layers. And you're going to see that pattern jump out at you, and you're going to see the way the light plays off of it, and it's going to shimmer and look almost holographic at times.
The bladesmithing community refers to this effect as chatoyance, or the shine of a cat's eye. Aside from the striking pattern, quality Damascus knives are known to be hard but flexible, and able to maintain a sharp edge. To make Damascus steel, Zach starts by layering two different kinds of high carbon steel. Managing the layers means more work for the smith. And while high-end monosteel knives may perform similarly, Damascus knives are coveted for their striking appearance and the craftsmanship required to achieve it. After tacking the layers together, Zach puts the stack in the forge and heats it to about 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. He needs an experienced eye to judge when the steel is ready, because it's at risk of breaking off the handle while the layers are not yet forge welded together. Zach needs to consider the kind of pattern he wants to make before he can begin forging. A bold pattern means fewer layers, and a more intricate pattern can require several thousand. And working with so many layers to achieve his intended design means lots of things can go wrong. Out of thousands of hammer strikes, a single blow in the wrong place can ruin the pattern. Even when the pattern is done to perfection, Zach has to forge the steel into a knife without distorting the design. And if he forges the steel when it's too cold, it can crack, and he has to start over, which for Damascus steel can mean losing weeks' worth of work. Once he forge welds the steel into a long bar, Zach can begin folding over the layers. The layer count has the most effect on the price. The more layers, the more folding and work for Zach, which means a higher price point. The pattern on this particular knife, called Texas Wind, has only 45 layers, which is why Zach sells it for just under $1,000. But his more expensive knives can have 5,000 layers, and that can take a month to complete, giving it a higher price tag.
So you can see I'm twisting the steel with this wrench. It's got to be real hot. If it gets too cool, the layers will want to shear and come apart, and then the piece is trash. I'm keeping track of the rate that I'm twisting at and counting as I go.
This technique is specific to twist Damascus, and it creates star-like patterns on the steel.
Too much twisting and the steel will want to shear, but the tighter the twist, the more dramatic the pattern. And that'll do it.
When Zach is making a standard Damascus wave pattern, he continues to work on elongating and thinning the bar using a power hammer. Zach's larger power hammer cost him $20,000. But that's just a drop in the bucket. He spent at least $100,000 on specialized machinery. But this large investment allows Zach to produce high-quality Damascus knives. Once Zach forges the tip of the blade, he cross-checks it with his template to ensure the knife looks exactly as it should.
Now it needs to undergo a metallurgical change, which is called heat treatment, and this part is hardening. And without doing this, the thing might be shaped like a knife, but it won't behave like a knife. It won't take an edge, it won't hold an edge. So the heat treatment is really a critical process, and it determines the metallurgy and therefore the performance of the finished knife.
But it's the quenching that makes or breaks the knife. Sometimes a blade will fail in the quench by cracking or warping irretrievably.
Looks like the blade came through the hardening process really well. It's straight, it doesn't have much warping. Little warps can be corrected, and I can see that the scale has blown away from the surface of the steel here, which tells me that the steel has contracted and become hard, and that's what I was looking for. So now this is ready for finish grinding and then a handle.
The grinding operation is one of the areas where the skill is kind of most important and most obvious, and this is one of the things that really drives the cost. A single slip can ruin the piece in an instant.
The handle is also an important factor when pricing the final product. Some materials, like local maple, are more affordable for Zach, but this Arizona ironwood costs him 10 times as much. It's also a harder wood than maple and requires more work to shape. Zach designs the handles so they serve the purpose of the knife. He makes kitchen knife handles slim, but large enough for the chef to have a firm grip. A hunting knife, on the other hand, requires different properties. It might be used with cold or wet hands, which can cause them to slip. The final step in creating a Damascus knife is the etching, which makes the pattern bolder to the eye. Once dipped in the etchant mixture, one of the alloys oxidizes and turns darker, while the other alloy resists, maintaining its color. Now, the Damascus pattern is revealed. But Zach isn't done yet. He needs to assess the quality of his creation.
Let's test the edge. And I use paper for this. This is a simple test. It should glide through with no problem.
This knife is razor sharp, with no dullness that needs adjusting. It's ready to sell to chefs like Diego Moya. Diego has been a chef for 27 years and focuses on vegetable cookery.
I've had some sharp knives, but this one kind of out of the gate just feels like it glides through without any resistance at all. It's pretty amazing. It just does exactly what your arm wants it to do. You don't have to fight it.
He's using a 10-inch chef's knife made by Zach, which costs $1,200.
I think the experience is one of effortlessness. I think you just forget that you're using a knife. And I think that when you forget you're using a knife and you use your arm to produce the cutting motion, that's pure bliss. For this kind of experience, you have to pay the price.
Zach's buyers typically know the work that's gone into the knife they purchase and the skill level required to make a quality Damascus knife. Zach is one of the fewer than 200 master bladesmiths designated by the American Bladesmith Society. To earn the title, they must successfully produce a Damascus blade with a minimum of 300 layers. The blade must be strong, tough, sharp, and balanced. In Zach's case, he had to take the test twice before getting the Mastersmith title. The knife performance test includes cutting through a 2x4 and even shaving hair off his arm. But it was the presentation test that set Zach back because of a 10-degree misalignment in the handle. Since becoming a mastersmith, Zach has continued to evolve his skills in Damascus making. One of his current projects might sell for over $100,000 if it's officially commissioned.
So this is a project that I've been working on designing for quite a while. This is a very elaborate Middle Eastern sword, a type of scimitar. This is a rough ground blade that I forged out of 1,500 layer Damascus.
The demand for Damascus knives has created a market for fake Damascus, where manufacturers imprint the swirl patterns on the knife and sell it at a more affordable price.
You can get a Damascus knife for $30, but it will not cut anything for you. There's definitely a growing demand for Damascus steel. When I started out knife making, it was not super well known, and I've really seen it myself in the last 15 years or so as the cultural awareness has come up and people really understand what they're looking at.
This spacesuit, built in 1974, was reported to cost between $15 and $22 million. Today, that would be about $150 million. Having not delivered any new mission-ready extravehicular suits since then, NASA is running out of spacesuits. In fact, NASA are down to just 4 flight-ready EVA suits. Since 2009, NASA has invested more than $200 million in spacesuit development, recently unveiling the X-EMU prototype. But NASA still does not have a new fleet of spacesuits. So why has it taken so long for new spacesuits to be built? And what makes them so expensive?
Spacesuits are so expensive because they're complex, human-shaped spacecraft. Think about them in terms of spacecraft, not as work clothes. A spacesuit has to protect an astronaut from the vacuum of space, from radiation coming from the sun and other bodies, and it has to protect against fast-traveling particles that are traveling up to 18,000 miles an hour that could penetrate the suit. They provide oxygen, communications, telemetry, and everything else that a human needs to survive, all rolled into one tiny human-formed spacecraft.
But the spacesuits NASA currently uses are more than 40 years old. 18 suits were developed for the Space Shuttle program in 1974 and have vastly overworked their original 15-year life design. Suit number 1 was only used for certification, while Suit 2 was destroyed during ground testing. 2 suits were lost in the Challenger disaster in 1986, and another 2 in the Columbia disaster in 2003. The most recent spacesuit loss was Unit 17 during SpaceX 7's cargo mission mishap. The exact cost to replace this unit is unknown, but estimates range as high as $250 million. For the remaining 11 suits, the damage is mounting, with 7 in various stages of refurbishment and maintenance. That leaves only 4 flight-ready spacesuits aboard the International Space Station. In fact, NASA's first all-female spacewalk was postponed because the space station had only 1 medium-sized suit. This milestone was finally achieved when NASA sent up a medium torso shell to fit the existing larger suit. NASA has invested about $250 million developing the X-EMU suit for its Artemis program, which plans to take humans back to the surface of the Moon by 2024, with a view to eventually go to Mars. With that goal fast approaching and the number of existing spacesuits dwindling, NASA engineers face a new kind of space race.
There is absolutely a sense of urgency, not only because of the number of suits itself is relatively small, but the individual components that we use to keep the suits healthy and moving forward is also dwindling. A great example of that is the carbon dioxide sensors. The design that the current suits fly is a heritage design, some of the components of which are no longer produced. Some of the vendors that made those components no longer even exist. And so today, the CO2 sensor is a great example of a component where a replacement design that will work for both the existing suit and the new suit, basically be a drop-in replacement that's compatible with both suit designs.
These people-shaped spacecraft are packed with complex components, but the most expensive parts are subject to debate.
The most expensive component of the spacesuit are the gloves. The gloves are the most complex because the astronauts need them for manual dexterity to do meaningful work in space. You see the interior, you see a system of pulleys and strings that hold it together. And then on the outside of the glove, you see the system of heat radiators that allow the astronaut to keep their hands warm.
The gloves are an amazing and intricate component, but at the end of the day, the pressure garment, including the gloves, is actually less expensive than the life support system. The backpack that is worn on the back of the suit is a highly compressed set of technologies that do everything from maintain temperature to remove carbon dioxide and continue to provide pressure inside the suit itself. And I think in the end, several of those components are each more expensive than most of the other garment components like the gloves.
But even these expertly engineered suits can go wrong. In 2013, European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano reported that his helmet started filling with water.
That stuff on your forehead is not sweat? No, it's not. Oh, I see.
Hatch coming open.
Copy all, Chris. You could have some towels ready, that would be great.
In total, almost 1.5 litres of water leaked into his helmet, threatening to drown Parmitano mid-spacewalk. But considering that NASA's Apollo-era spacesuits allowed 12 humans to walk on the moon 50 years ago, and considering the Space Shuttle-era suits have been used on over 200 spacewalks, is such a large investment in new spacesuits needed?
Well, that depends on what you're going to ask the astronauts to do. Walking on Mars is different from walking on the moon. It's a different environment, it has different hazards. So when you're picking these assignments for astronauts, you have to take into account, do you want the astronaut to be able to walk, bend over, pick up things, or will he or she be carrying something? So you have all those considerations that have to fold into that design.
We believe it is a necessity. Some of the components and some of the design concepts are no longer consistent with our values and expectations in terms of the quantity and distribution of crew members that we fit. I believe that, yes, the investment is appropriate and worthwhile. All those dollars get spent here on the ground, and they are returned to us in ways that ultimately yield benefits for all of humanity and for the taxpayers here in this country. We are also lowering the barriers to entry from a commercial perspective, getting more companies involved, getting more companies competing and innovating to try to continue to reduce that price.
In an effort to develop technology at lower costs, NASA often sets design challenges for innovation, sometimes partnering with the designers and companies who impress the most. In the 2009 Astronaut Glove Challenge, Ted Southern bagged the second-place prize of $100,000. He and his partner, Nikolai Moiseev, a leading Russian spacesuit engineer, used their winnings to form Final Frontier Design.
We as a business were formed about 10 years ago and have worked with NASA on components of EVA suits for that whole time. NASA's our biggest customer, and we've delivered prototype components for the suit, including a glove, elbow, shoulder assemblies, parts and pieces. But just over the last 2 years, we've focused on bringing the whole system together.
And Final Frontier plans to build its own EVA suit much, much cheaper than NASA's.
We intend to deliver flight-level suits with similar requirements as NASA's. Our suits are made with the same material as the suits that NASA used down to the mill. Traditionally, spacesuits are very expensive. I expect our suit development will be in the multi-million-dollar range, but I hope that our suit EVA system will be around $2 million a piece or less.
Even though NASA has not officially released the unit price of the new XEMU suit, it's safe to say their costs will be much higher.
If we were to take the design of the suit we have today, if we were to reproduce copies of that suit, we believe that would cost us in the range of 15 to 25 million per unit. But we do believe that the design that we're developing today with the XEMU should not only stay within that range, we actually believe that competition and the innovation that we've fostered will actually drive that cost lower per unit.
How does NASA's spacesuit costs compare with other countries? Russia's equivalent of the EMU suit is called the Orlan. Like NASA, it also has 4 suits aboard the space station, but it also has reserves, both at the Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia, and at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. According to Nikolai Moiseev, who is one of the few engineers to work on both America's EMU and Russia's Orlan, unlike NASA, Roscosmos has continually developed new generations of spacesuits. Moiseev personally participated in the development of 5 generations of Russian spacesuits, and estimates that 24 units were made between 1997 and 2002, with a further 24 units made between 2002 and 2019. Roscosmos is also developing a new EVA suit for Russia's first proposed moon landing by 2030. With Russian technology in a cycle of constant development and American EMU fleets continuing to age, more commercial opportunities could become available for private companies like Final Frontier to develop spacesuit technologies at lower prices. In 2017, Elon Musk revealed the SpaceX IVA spacesuit. Although this intravehicular suit is only for use inside the spacecraft, Its 3D printed helmet and custom-made garments are a glimpse into the future of commercial spacewear. But is there an actual need for cheaper spacesuits? Or is space exploration unavoidably expensive?
I believe the world needs cheaper spacesuits because, in my opinion, it's inevitable that we will expand past the surface of the Earth. We need to take advantage of the resources of space to keep our planet healthy and alive. So whether it's spacesuits or rocket technology or means of living in microgravity, all of these things I think are important for the future of humanity.
It's one small step for man, one giant toast for NASA.
Even in the high-end world of jewelry, Cuban link chains are a symbol of luxury. This 18-karat gold chain is worth $27,000, and some of the most valuable chains will cost 10 times that. Making a single chain requires the skill of more than 5 experienced jewelers and can take over 12 hours. So how exactly are Cuban link chains made? And is that what makes them so expensive?
Somebody had to literally take 14 hours of their day running hot steel through machinery to then turn it by hand, to then file it by hand, to then polish it by hand. You're not just wearing a chain, you're wearing somebody's blood, sweat, and tears and passion around your neck.
The origin of the Cuban link chain is tough to pinpoint, but it likely didn't start in Cuba. It was a quintessential part of hip-hop style in the 70s and 80s, and grew in popularity as hip-hop became more mainstream in the US. But not all Cuban link chains are created equal. Many Cuban link chains are made by machines in countries like the US, Italy, and China, but the authentic and most expensive ones are made by hand at just a few shops in Miami.
When you move into the higher end of Cuban link chains, which you get into the $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 chains, those have to be handmade. One, because of the attention to detail. The file, the tight links.
It's like going to a Ferrari dealer. You could buy a Ferrari off the lot, or you could have it made to how you want. This is a custom build.
A chain like this goes through 30 manual and time-consuming stages.
The skills come from your ability and practice and knowledge. Worldwide, I can't tell you an exact number. Within South Florida, there's a handful of people, literally a handful of people that could do this.
Not only is this process incredibly labor-intensive, it's also dangerous. Chino and his crew work with 1,000-degree flames to melt down the gold and form it into a bar.
You definitely got to be paying attention to what you're doing in this job. One mess up, you're gonna hurt yourself. There has been people that have lost fingers in this business.
That bar passes through a rolling machine as many as 12 times just to make it thinner. Each of the 9 jewelers at Gold Fever Miami has a specific job. At the stretch bench, one jeweler can spend over an hour just stretching the wire to length.
This isn't dirt, it's actual gold. If you look at my hands, you'll see the flakes of gold on them.
This wire then gets curled around a copper rod to form the shape for the links. For smaller chains, a drill gets the job done, but thicker ones need the strength of 2 jewelers. The most crucial stage of the process comes next. It also requires the most skill.
The soldering is the most intricate part of what you're doing. Essentially what you're doing is you're heating up gold. And right before it begins to break down and melt, you're introducing solder.
Solder is another type of metal that's used to permanently close each link.
So it's the balance of applying the right amount of flame with the right amount of technique to when those 2 metals meet, that solder melts and fuses into the gold. So if you left too long, the whole thing is just liquid gold. If done way too early, the solder won't melt properly and you won't get that fusion between the links.
You can't mess that up, or you're gonna create gaps in the chain. And you can't be scared to stop and just do it all over again.
It's no secret the price of gold plays a part in determining the cost of these chains. An ounce of gold costs $1,700 today. but even the most high-end Cuban links are mixed with something else. Gold itself is a very soft material, typically too soft to be made into jewelry on its own. It has to be alloyed with other metals. White gold, for example, is an alloy of gold made of white metals like silver, zinc, and nickel. Those metals make the gold more pliable, allowing it to be stretched and twisted during the jewelry making process, but they can be especially difficult to work with. One small movement can make all the difference. In rare cases with white gold, this can happen.
This is the reason why it costs so much. If any one of these links break, you then have to take it back to the soldering table, resolder it, and bring it back here and turn it again.
Once the links are properly turned and tightened, the chain will lie flat. A jeweler must then file down the chain so that each side is level and looks exactly the same.
And here is where the passion of the jeweler comes into hand to how beautiful he can make that shape.
But these Cuban links in particular didn't become so sought after or so valuable until recently. Google Trends shows that searches for Cuban link chains began taking off in 2012. And in the last 2 years, Gold Fever Miami sales have grown 100 times over. The shop used to sell $2,000 worth of Cuban links a month. That number is now over $200,000.
Whether you're the most famous or you're just starting off, to legitimize yourself as a rapper, you have to have jewelry. And if you have jewelry, you have a Miami Cuban link chain.
In 2012, Jay-Z wore one of the priciest Cuban links made at the time, worth $200,000. A year later, Daddy Yankee debuted his 10-kilo Cuban link chain in a music video. And there's even more traction in the music industry now.
They're so intertwined with pop culture, more specifically hip hop and reggaeton. Just about every song that has a music video will have a rapper with a Miami Cuban link chain.
It's become, in a way, like a status symbol. We have customers that want to match their Rolexes to their chains.
These versions are often decked out with diamonds, which naturally makes them pricier. But Gus doesn't see demand slowing for chains like this or the more modest ones.
Right now, as of March of 2021, we are pumping anywhere from 10 to 15 kilos in 5 days, so per 5 weeks. And we still can't keep up with the demand. We still have a wait time of 5 to 7 weeks.
This, coupled with the steep price of gold, means prices likely won't drop anytime soon.
Keep going. Keep going.
Often referred to as the Wagyu of salmon, Copper River King salmon can cost up to $120 per pound.
So like retail price, $1,500, $2,000 right here.
That's 6 times as much as other wild salmon and 10 times more than farmed salmon. This salmon is extremely rare to come by. For fishers in Cordova, Alaska, it means spending entire days in dangerous waters, using life-threatening equipment and spending thousands of dollars on a permit. All with the serious chance of coming back to port empty-handed. So is Copper River King salmon worth the challenge? And why is it so expensive? King salmon, also called Chinook salmon, is one of the 5 species of wild Pacific salmon swimming through the Alaskan waters. The Copper River King is the largest and most nutritious of them all.
The color of the Copper River salmon is just so vibrant. It's such a deep, deep red, and it's like one of those things when you see it, it's very obvious that that's a Copper River salmon, and it just tastes so buttery. It's amazing.
Kyle and his crew set sail in the early hours of the morning from the Cordova harbor. It will take them 2 hours to reach the delta of the Copper River. King salmon will stay in the Copper River Delta for only 3 to 6 weeks. Kings are the first wild salmon of the season, and the start of the season is unpredictable. Although it roughly always falls around mid-May, fishers won't know it's time to set sail until less than a day before.
We typically have such a short window to fish, it's really important for me to be able to make quick decisions.
Go, go, go.
The unpredictable outcome of each fishing run not only affects the price of each catch, but also builds up the excitement.
That's insane. That's insane.
The location is the first challenge for Kyle and his crew. The delta of the river is very large, and not a lot of salmon swim in that area, so fishers like Kyle have to take their boats to shallow waters.
It's extremely dangerous to fish for Copper River king salmon because they like to hang out in shallow waters, and when you're fishing in that area, you're a lot more exposed to Mother Nature. You know, the waves are crushing, they're breaking on top of you, and you're a lot more susceptible to capsizing your boat. We're about to pick our anchor, and then we're gonna make a set.
Once the anchor is set, the chances of catching anything are slim. King salmon makes up only a small percentage of the salmon in the Copper River. 90% is sockeye. That makes Kyle's job extremely difficult. Aside from that, local laws require he uses specific nets called gill nets. They're hung vertically to catch the fish by their gills.
Gill netting is an extremely effective way to catch these fish because each net is hand-built and completely customized. So, you know, for Copper River king salmon, we use a lot larger mesh size, around 6 inches, so the smaller fish swim right through it, and, you know, when we are able to locate a king salmon, they fit perfectly in our net. King! Give me a second, I'll explain in a second. Should have pulled him over the bow. So what had happened was, you know, so king salmon, they're really large fish and they typically don't really get stuck into the net. They usually just wrap up. So it's imperative that you have a dip net to catch them in case they pop out. And what had happened there was, it was the first king of the day. I was super excited. I had the net underneath and it had already peaked and started to crown over the bow roller. And I tried to reach forward to pull it over, but because that had popped off and I was only holding the dip net with one hand, and because the king was so large, it overpowered me and it ended up swimming out.
But the same features that make gill nets such an effective way to catch king salmon are also what make using them so dangerous.
There are a lot of hazards and dangers using a gill net, specifically on deck for the crew, just because we are using hydraulic equipment to send the net out into the water. There's a lot of loose mesh that goes flying out, so any, you know, loose strings from a hoodie or shoelaces, all those are really prone to getting snagged.
Missed catches are common here in the Copper River. Even after spending his whole day out on the boat, Kyle has a serious chance of coming back empty-handed. That makes the fish that he does catch even more prized.
Yeah, go! Oh, woo! We just caught this toad of a Copper River king salmon. This one probably weighs probably 30, 35 pounds. And for like retail price, this goes is like $1,500, $2,000 right here. And just for a size comparison, this is a Copper River sockeye salmon. Yeah, it's got a darker mouth. And then also on top of the spine, you'll see it's got spots along the line, and also this nice silver with spots on the tail as well. So this one right here is probably 22 pounds gross. It's a very beautiful, very fatty Copper River king salmon. Very excited that we got the first one on board. Day's getting started, and looking forward to catching many more.
The huge size of the Copper River king salmon is due to its migration. Wild salmon are born in freshwater streams like the Copper River, and then migrate to the ocean as juveniles. After spending most of their lives at sea, they return to their home to spawn. For the kings returning to the Copper River, this means enduring a 300-mile-long journey against a 7-mile-per-hour current, swimming between glaciers, and gaining 3,600 feet in elevation.
Copper River salmon have the most intense salmon migratory route out of any salmon in the world. Because of that long journey home, it has a huge impact on the flavor of the Copper River salmon. Because the moment the salmon enter, they go from the ocean, the seawater, and they hit that fresh water of the Copper River salmon, their body automatically changes into reproductive mode. So up until that day that they hit that fresh water, they're just feeding and building up fat to make that 300-mile-long journey. Go, 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 go. Nice.
39,000 kings are set to return home to the Copper River this year, 13% below the 10-year average of 46,000. Out of these 39,000, fisheries are only permitted to catch less than half to ensure enough salmon make it up the river for future generations. Kyle is only allowed to go out once enough salmon have escaped the fishing ground and have started to make their way up the Copper River. The catch limit is different every day. It can be reached at any moment, and when it is, Kyle has to stop fishing and return to port immediately. But he still needs to bring home enough to keep his business running, and fishing in the Copper River bears high costs.
If I came back empty-handed, it would cost me, it could be anywhere from $300 to $600 in fuel and probably a chunk of my pride.
For a company like Kyle's, fuel can top $12,000 a season, but that's still significantly lower than the cost of a permit to commercially fish in these waters, which is $250,000.
When I first started commercial fishing, I did not save any of my catch for myself. Just because I had taken on so much debt to buy into the fishery, I couldn't afford to save any of the salmon for myself. I eat salmon very regularly now. All right, come in, come. Okay. Yeah, come. Oh! Oh! Holy shit. Go. Oh my God, we got another one.
That's 6 kings.
Oh my God. That's insane. Last other day, we just brought in 7 Copper River Kings. Insane. Dude, that was bonkers.
Once Kyle returns to port, the fish must be filleted and packaged as soon as possible to preserve its nutritional value.
It takes us about a week to get our salmon to consumers. The moment our fishermen return to port, we'll fillet, portion, vacuum pack, and flash freeze for a minimum of 3 days. So then that way the seafood is consumable for sushi. It's considered sushi grade. They're so fatty. It's so oily, it's hard to hold on to them. They keep slipping.
Kyle sells his king salmon to fine dining and sushi restaurants, but also directly to customers across the country. Shipping out of Alaska can get very expensive because of its remote location. It costs him $65 to ship a 5-pound box of salmon from Cordova to New York. Due to an increase in demand, the price of king salmon has slowly gone up over the last 5 years. A pound of Copper River king salmon is now going for $100 to $120. Although bigger fish sell for more, huge king salmon are getting harder to come by. A 2020 study found that in the last 60 years, salmon in Alaska have been getting smaller, especially kings. Since 1960, king salmon have lost 8% in body length. Streams are warming earlier in the year, and salmon are making their migrations at a younger age and smaller size. There's also competition with other fish populations caused by hatcheries releasing the fish they produce into the sea. In the long term, this drop in size affects the salmon's commercial value, the transport of nutrients, egg production, and especially for king salmon, it reduces the supply for rural communities.
salmon and seafood in Alaska is more than just more than a job. It's very deeply rooted into our traditions. We have very many rural communities in Alaska that rely on these wild salmon runs as like their only source of protein. So, they don't have, some of them, they don't have access to grocery stores. So it's really important that we have these salmon runs returned for them.
Buying a survival bunker used to be just something for doomsdayers and survivalists. But this factory in Texas can't keep up with demand because of the pandemic.
People want these like yesterday. They want them so bad they'll pay up to get them right now.
The most basic habitable bunkers start at $50,000, not including installation. But if you want to include a movie theater, pool, and rock climbing wall, you can spend as much as $4.5 million. So why do people spend this kind of cash on something they might never use? And why are bunkers so expensive? Meet Ron Hubbard, not the founder of Scientology. Just Ron, the founder of Atlas Survival Shelters.
So how do you get prepared? Well, you get your food and water, but once you have all that, you're going to need a bunker, and that's when I come into play.
He sells bunkers out of his 10-acre factory in Sulphur Springs, Texas.
First and foremost, we want to make sure that the bunkers are airtight because, God forbid, any kind of airborne plague or smoke, chemical warfare, biological warfare, whatever.
Ron says he builds about 24 bunkers a year that are the size of homes, as well as hundreds of smaller storm shelters. He says there's a real demand for an underground escape, pandemic and politics aside.
Conservative or liberal, you just got to be concerned for the safety of your family in case this country ever ends up into any kind of revolution, civil war, or if we go into some kind of world war.
The craze for bunkers is not exactly new.
A new housing development near Denver, Colorado shows the nation's first model homes with built-in fallout shelters. The room is
Thousands of Americans built their own nuclear fallout shelters at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s. They were made out of steel to protect against radiation. Larry Hall converted a Cold War nuclear missile silo in central Kansas into a 15-story inverted skyscraper. The government decommissioned the silo, and Larry bought it for $300,000 in 2008.
Whether it was Kim Jong-un before this, or Iran with the previous threats, or when Barack Obama was elected as president, or when Donald Trump was elected as president, people have a variety of fears.
The Survival Condo Project has 12 apartments, some costing up to $4.5 million each. So far, he's sold all but 2 of the condos.
We have residential level 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Then there's a library and classroom, a theater and lounge, exercise and spa. We also have a sauna, complete with different colored mood lighting.
After all, if you're going to spend a serious amount of time trying to survive underground, and if you can afford it, you may as well thrive. In recent years, personalized disaster prep has grown into a multi-million-dollar business. At least 13.2 million Americans say they have plans and provisions in place to survive a month or more without power, running water, or transportation. Prepping can simply mean storing a number of items to help cope during a blackout, or having a storm shelter to survive tornadoes and hurricane-force winds. Since the start of 2021, storm shelter sales are up 30%. That's on top of a 35% increase the previous year.
Possibly part of what has driven that increase in sales is that 2020 was such a traumatic year for all of us. So putting a storm shelter in place for their family was something they could control. They could actually impact and have some control over the safety of their family.
But bunkers are in a different league. Ron sells bunkers with a variety of add-ons like escape tunnels and hidden doors.
So this typically will have a secret passage leading to a secret hatch going down to a secret room. This isn't our grandfather's bomb shelter. They have all the bells and whistles that you would have in a house. If you can have it in a house, you can have it in the bunker.
This model costs about $500,000 and fits 3 private bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, dining room, living room, and a game room. Ron says he has over a year's worth of back orders, even though prices for the materials to build the bunkers have gone up between 15 and 20% since last November.
The cost of wood has tripled, the cost of steel's tripled, the cost of gas has doubled. Everything's gone through the roof.
Some people decide to build their own shelters. About 60 miles outside of Dallas, a doctor in his 40s built his own 1,200 square foot bunker. He asked to remain anonymous about his labor of love.
I look at this as kind of like life insurance and disability insurance. It's something that you have if you can afford it.
So far, he's spent around $100,000 on the bunker that sits underneath his home and has yet to actually use.
I don't advertise it. I don't mind when I have family or friends over. I'll give them a tour, show it, but publicly I don't want everyone to know about it.
But what makes a bunker so costly?
The pretty things like the stainless steel appliances and the nicer furniture and the higher ceilings are all really relatively low cost. The things that are the cost drivers are the life support systems. Those are tremendously expensive.
Bunkers are made of steel and concrete. It took the doctor about a year and $22,000 worth of materials to plan and engineer his bunker. He paid an excavation company $12,200 to dig a hole 80 feet long and 50 feet wide and about 16 feet below ground. Then he built the bunker quickly because he was afraid rain would ruin the excavation work. He poured a concrete foundation, walls, and filled in the dirt around and over it. He paid more than $20,000 for concrete, $12,000 for styrofoam, and $2,000 for this single door. He said he'll invest another $30,000 to build out a kitchen and other rooms. Of course, he's already stocked the bunker with $30,000 worth of guns and ammunition. Pandemic fears are likely to stay strong for years after it's over, and the truth is, there's always something to fear.
Crash test dummies take all the hits, so that we don't have to. Today they're jam-packed with technology and can cost more than $1 million each. But despite decades of innovation, one thing has remained the same. The body shapes of the dummies themselves are still based on an average-sized man from the middle of last century. We went inside the factory of one of the top manufacturers to see how they're assembling the most advanced and diverse generation of dummies ever, and to find out why they are so expensive. Humanetics is the largest manufacturer of crash test dummies in the world, based, fittingly, just outside America's Motor City, Detroit. But ATDs, as they are known, are a rare breed.
People think that there's hundreds of thousands or millions of crash test dummies in the world. In fact, there really isn't. The entire world market probably sells about 300 crash test dummies in any one year.
The most advanced Thor design takes up to 5 months to complete. That's because they can include more than 30,000 parts.
It may look like a simple mannequin, but inside the dummy is a lot of engineering and a lot of time and a lot of work.
A complex combination of metals, rubber, foam, vinyl and plastics make up each dummy. And then inside comes an intricate network of sensors and electronics, which feed thousands of bits of data back to car builders about the kinds of force experienced in a crash. Here, a worker pours the vinyl mixture into a face mold before putting it into an oven. And the finished product has got to be perfect. Each dummy needs to survive countless impacts while continuing to relay reliable data. Since the 1960s, car safety improvements, designed in part from data provided by crash test dummies, have saved an estimated 600,000 lives in the US.
So it has to be reliable not only for 1 or 2 crashes, but for tens of thousands of crashes over a lifespan that could be 30 plus years.
After molding, each one is trimmed and finished by hand. Underneath the skin, a skeleton provides strength and durability. But unlike human bones, these ones don't break so easily.
Most of the bone structures are made out of steel and it has to be machined. We use numerically controlled machining to make sure they're precisely manufactured.
So inside here he's actually machining what is a hybrid 390 fifth pelvis. We have a print where we have to meet all the tight tolerances. He's machining out the hip sockets where the femurs are going to go.
Skulls, ribs and pelvises are all modelled after their human counterparts. Older models are crude compared to the latest high-tech generation. This Thor dummy even has a pelvis with movable parts.
The Thor pelvis is much more anatomically correct. It allows for more load cells and sensors to be installed on the dummy so that we can record more accurate information.
An array of sensors is used to detect which body parts would have been damaged or broken in a crash and which would have just been left with bumps and bruises.
Every injury that we are able to calculate is because we have literally sensors in every body part that's likely to have an injury. So it's very complex.
The sensors are built and calibrated in their own special lab. The newest dummies contain hundreds of them. When a dummy crashes, the forces come from different directions at different strengths. Sensors can measure compression, torque, impact, displacement and acceleration. Older dummies had cables running into them that sent information to an outside computer.
The weight of the cabling would bias the test in itself. So we developed a data acquisition system. This is really like the black box that goes inside the crash test dummy. But what that does is captures the data in microseconds from the crash, and then that can be downloaded separately.
It's no wonder that a dummy comes with such a hefty price tag.
And if you look at our most advanced crash test dummies with hundreds of sensors and 30,000 parts, hand-built to the most biofidelic standards in the world, they can be as much as $1 million.
Yet the majority of crash tests are still carried out with less sophisticated dummies.
The vehicle is underway.
And in spite of the fact that more women than men in the US hold driver's licenses, ratings agencies continue to use dummies based on a male body shape to compile their star ratings for car manufacturers.
For front crashes, we use a hybrid 3 dummy that represents a mid-sized male. For our side crashes, we use what's called a SID2S dummy, represents a smaller female occupant or an adolescent.
Women and adolescents are represented by smaller versions of the male body shape. Even the male dummies used in tests are behind the times. They're modelled on the height and weight of a man in the US from the 1980s. While height hasn't changed, waistlines have. The average man has put on 20 pounds since then, while the standard dummy has not. Humanetics and other dummy manufacturers began designing more representative dummies more than a decade ago.
The abdomen is slightly more biofidelic than the 50th has historically been.
The Thor generation of models include both a male version, the Thor 50th, and a female version, the Thor 5th.
The difference here is it's not a scaled down male. This is truly a female crash test dummy. And if you look at the Thor 5th, there are many new sensors that have been added to specifically address the injuries and concerns that we're seeing in the field associated with female drivers.
Better reflecting real body shapes and sizes means a wider variety of dummies and greater production costs, but the net result is better data and safer vehicles.
You can actually provide additional information back to the designers of the car companies, the designers of the airbag, the seatbelt, and the other restraint suppliers, and they can use that information to build even safer cars.
However, the cars that we'll see years from now might not ever be tested with crash test dummies at all.
The future holds potentially many changes for our industry. One of the things that might change is that we will be conducting less physical testing with real dummies and real vehicles, and more testing in the virtual world to represent a wider range of speeds, impact angles, a wider range of occupants, male, female, different sizes.
Stone crab claws are one of the priciest seafoods you can buy. And depending on their size, a pound of claws at a restaurant can cost as much as $70. But catching these crabs is hard work. Strangely enough, fishers can only harvest the claws from the crabs, while the bodies must be returned to the ocean. So what makes these claws so coveted? And why are they so expensive? You can only fish for stone crab on the southeastern coast of the US, Cuba, the Bahamas, and Mexico. And it's Florida where more stone crabs are caught than anywhere else. These crustaceans are markedly more expensive than other popular crabs. A pound of claws can cost 2 times the price of Alaskan snow crab legs. Part of what makes these crabs so costly is the labor-intensive process of catching them.
There's a nice crab.
Ernie Piton Jr. has been commercially fishing for stone crabs for over 40 years. With limited time to harvest each year, his crew must start their days early, sailing out before the sun rises. The process begins with dropping traps down to the ocean floor.
This is probably the funnest part, you know? You get to be a little more physical, you know what I mean? It's a little bit of a rhythm thing going on here. It's like dancing mariachi.
But plucking these claws can be a dangerous process.
The claws on an adult crab can have as much as 9,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. With the enormous pressure that's exerted, they could actually pop a finger off at the joint.
These crabs, they have a mind of their own. You can easily get bit, you know, if you're not careful. I've only been bit maybe, say, 8 times in my career. Popped over 1 million claws in my day.
The crew leaves the traps in the water for about 2 weeks before they're pulled in by a rope. Then each one must be sorted thoroughly.
We come back in a couple of weeks and then got a couple in the trap. We're gonna pull them out. We're gonna pop their claws and hope for a good day.
Crews break off the claws quickly so they don't keep the crabs out of water for too long. But even if a trap is full of crabs, Kevin can't necessarily take every claw. The state requires all harvested claws to be at least 2 7/8 inches long. Crabbers can legally break off both claws if they meet the required size.
The ones that look smaller, we measure them on the gauge, like that one.
Crabs are one of few animals that can regenerate. When a crab loses a claw, or 2, it can grow each one back in time. On average, claws can take up to 3 years to grow large enough to harvest again, which is why the state requires that crabbers pay close attention to each claw's size. This ensures fishers don't remove one prematurely. But despite the claw's ability to regrow, some researchers have questioned the sustainability of this system. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission found that 46 to 82% of crabs died from the loss of 2 claws, while 23 to 59% died from the removal of 1. That's compared to just 12.8% of crabs that died when no claws were removed. Crabs can also only regrow a claw if the joint that linked it is left intact. Otherwise, they'll bleed to death. This makes the way these claws are broken all the more important for preserving the fishery's future. Hiring enough people to make the operation run smoothly is another reason for the high price of these claws. And then there's one other cost you'd never expect. Each trip requires 900 pounds of pig's feet for bait, and that's just about half of the total cost of fishing for the day.
Normal running cost to go stone crabbing a day is about $1,100 to leave the dock. Bait prices have gone up, fuel prices have gone up, you know, the trap tag prices have gone up.
After 10 hours on the boat, Ernie's crew must boil and ice their catch as soon as they return. Otherwise, the claws won't stay fresh. They finish the day by weighing each claw, which ultimately sets the final value. Claws are sold in 4 sizes. At Billy's Stone Crab, restaurant prices range from $35 to $70 per pound.
We run about 4,000 pounds of stone crab through the restaurant each week. On a busy weekend, we sell 700 to 800 pounds of stone crab.
The most expensive order costs $140. The plate is made up of 4 7-ounce colossal claws, which yields just under 1 pound of crab meat. Fresh cooked claws sold on ice are less expensive, but even then, the mediums will cost you $29 per pound. Years ago, stone crabs weren't such valuable food. In the 1890s, they were nothing more than bycatch in spiny lobster traps. Fishers began to keep the crabs that fell into those traps, And by the late 20th century, the stone crab fishery had become one of the most valuable industries in Florida. Today, it's worth $30 million, and the prices of these claws aren't likely to drop anytime soon. Data from the FWC show the number of crabs caught each year has declined by 712,000 pounds. That's since peak harvest in the late 1990s. Many commercial harvesters have also started fishing farther offshore, pointing to a lesser number of crabs in the area. The FWC says both of these changes signify a threat of overfishing, and prices have gone up in order to keep the fishery profitable. To further protect the species' future, the FWC instated even stricter regulations last year. Two changes include an increase in the minimum size of harvestable claws and cutting the fishing season short by 2 weeks. These limitations aren't likely to lower the cost of stone crab claws, but the goal is to help preserve them and keep Florida fishers busy for years to come.
This is dancing the rice. It's a traditional technique to extract this ancient rice grain from its hull. It's just one of the many steps that members of the Ojibwe tribe perform to savour the grain. Known as Manoomin, meaning the good berry, this type of wild rice has been harvested by the tribe in the Great Lakes region of North America for centuries. A pound of it can sell for $24, 15 times as much as white rice. For the Ojibwe people, harvesting this rice means much more than money. It's a way to connect with their ancestors and pass on their traditions to future generations. But as the rest of the world discovers this ancient grain, the tribe fears that it will lose its importance and that it will be separated from its natural ecosystem. So, what is the meaning of Manoomin? And why is it so expensive?
We're heading over to one of our tribal lakes that's on the reservation. This lake is 100% owned by the tribe. People say you can't own the water, but this is a reservation lake.
While most wild rice on the market is cultivated in paddies to ripen all at the same time, Manoomin still follows the natural cycle of the rice plant. This difference has not gone unnoticed, and the grain's popularity has been growing for decades. But for the Ojibwe tribe, Manoomin is sacred. They continue to harvest it by hand, which is one reason it can sell for twice as much as cultivated wild rice.
See, everything has a life, has a spirit, so that's why we offer tobacco to whatever we're doing.
Lee Lin is the rice chief of the tribal band here at Mole Lake. It's here that Manoomin grows. Every fall, when the season begins, Leland heads out to the lake with his cousin Chad to harvest the rice.
Right now I'm push-pulling Chad. Chad's our picker, I'm the push-puller. We're looking for the rice right now. The puller's job is to look for the rice and put him on the rice so he can pick it.
Looking for the rice on top. You know, like right here you can see there's rice kernels on top, a couple of spots. And even if there's nothing there, I'll still grab it and pull it in. Something could fall off.
The rice, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Every time you would say miigwech, miigwech.
To harvest the rice, Chad, the knocker, uses a set of wooden sticks to knock the rice directly off the plants into the canoe. As a knocker, Chad is following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who used to harvest Manoomin as well.
I made this set myself the year he passed. And then this set is the set that he made the year before he passed. Makes me feel good.
As he works, he thanks the plants for today's harvest.
Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Saying thanks also dictates a rhythm for picking.
That's the best sound in the world.
Unlike cultivated rice, Manoomin doesn't all ripen at the same time. So Leland and Chad must set out in the canoe multiple times during the season.
It's small in your hand, but after a while of being out here, it adds up. I mean, we were only out here for an hour and about a quarter of our boat is covered.
But what's here on the boat's floor isn't the size of the final harvest. Within this, they'll often find unripe rice and hulls with no rice inside at all.
Green rice, when we're talking about green rice, it's actually green rice. And this black rice here is ripe. There's years where we get what we call a ghost rice. The ghost rice you'll have the hull of the rice and there'll be nothing in it, it'll be empty. Some stocks don't always grow.
When Manoomin is sold, it usually sells for around $24 per pound. The price varies depending on the overall harvest, the stock, and the buyer's connections.
You know how people refer to oil as black gold? This is our black gold.
Now that Leland and Chad are back from the lake, it's time to dry the rice. Depending on how ripe it is, it may need to be soaked overnight.
See, this rice we didn't really have to get wet last night, just because it's already starting to ripen really good.
The whole community gets involved in the drying process. It's a great opportunity for young tribe members to learn from their elders. Air drying is the first step in separating the rice grain from the hulls. Removing the hulls further reduces the size of the overall harvest, but today's trip to the rice beds has been more successful than harvests in recent years.
This year we had some nice grains. It was long, it was fat. So this year your percentage of rice would be about 80-20. 80% of the grain you'll probably lose 20% with the hulls.
We're actually converting that rice from a medicine to a food. Whenever that wild rice has moisture or water in it, it still has a life.
Removing moisture is important for the following step: parching the rice on a wood fire. It's done in a metal pan with a wooden paddle.
This part is going to be the coolest part of the tub, and this is going to be the hottest part. So you're going to put this up on the fire, and you're going to actually see this actually turn brown as it starts parching.
If a grain retains too much moisture, it'll pop, just like popcorn. But the separation of the grains from their hulls is far from complete. To do that, Roger makes a shallow hole in the ground, pours in the rice, and covers it with deer hide. He then dons a pair of soft buckskin moccasins and threshes the rice by stepping on it. This step is called dancing the rice, and Roger takes it quite literally.
It looks like the twist, but it's the Anishinaabe two-step. I tell everyone, I said, this is how I got my wife of 47 years now.
The poles he uses are not for balance. He uses them to transfer his weight to avoid breaking the rice. Roger's two-step was successful. Once separated from the grains, the hulls are so lightweight, they fly away like dust. And that's exactly how they will be filtered out, by tossing the batch in the air from this birch bark basket. Nowadays, dancing and tossing the rice can also be done by a machine.
Yeah, you know, you got 2, 4, 6, 12 moccasins. 12 feet working at once instead of 2 feet working at once. As it rotates, it's taking the hulls off. You can see that there's long grain. There's some that's a little broken up. That little broken up stuff is good for soup rice.
Despite this faster method, the tribe places great importance on continuing to dance and toss the rice by hand.
There's elders that always told us to pay attention because someday you're going to be teaching this, you know. As a kid, I just kind of laughed about it and I was like, Yeah, you know, I'm not gonna be that guy, but here I am teaching everybody what I know.
But while a good return is important, the tribe doesn't harvest to make a profit. Manoomin is only sold when needed.
You know, you can't just buy this on Amazon. I'm sure that there are certain individuals that will sell it on the internet. It's all about people who are around here who can make connections with somebody who does this. It's all about those relationships and how they can, what price they're willing to give for a pound of rice.
Manoomin contains 3 times more protein than white rice, more vitamin B than brown rice, and is rich in antioxidants. These values have made it an essential part of the Ojibwe diet for centuries, together with berries, fish, meat, vegetables, and maple sugar.
Well, yeah, there is many different ways to make rice. You can add wild rice to just about any kind of dish. I mean, we got berries with wild rice, walleye cheek chowder with wild rice.
Our rice doesn't even compare nutritionally to white rice, or even Uncle Ben doesn't even have anything over us.
Mole Lake is fully owned by the local Ojibwe tribe, which carefully controls the flow of water and monitors its minerals. No motorboats are allowed in the lake, and duck and goose hunting is prohibited during the rice picking season.
We don't allow lead shot to be used when we shoot the birds, because then that settles into the sediment. The plant will uptake that lead.
This is an ancient rice bed. I mean, we had rice that was carbon dated 800 years ago.
For Leland and Chad, harvesting Manoomin isn't about collecting every last grain of rice from the plants. Not all the rice falls into the canoe, and that's okay. The rice that falls back into the water will reseed the lake for the next season.
We believe that you take what you need, not what you want.
Over the last 200 years, the ecosystem that supports Manoomin has come increasingly under threat. The tribe was forced to cede lands to the federal government in 1837 and 1842, and even today regularly receives multi-million-dollar offers from different suitors to sell the lake.
As Manoomin becomes more popular, a lot of non-tribal people who haven't done this, they want to go out and try and do it for themselves. So one of the concerns is that they don't know how to do it, because they can actually destroy a rice bed by when they're picking, they hit it too hard. They're trying to get everything off of it.
Although the harvest was good this year, this isn't always the case.
There's been people that would come off the lake daily with 200 plus pounds. There are years where you come in with an average of 150 pounds. This year seems to be one of the best.
Over the past century, the hand-harvested Manoomin habitat has declined by 1/3. Water pollution, oil pipelines, fluctuating water levels, rising temperatures, and invasive fish species are all factors threatening the delicate ecosystem at Mole Lake and other lakes where Manoomin grows.
There are other lakes around here that do have rice, but then, you know, it's not as big of a grain as what we got, or, you know, it ain't as thick as what we have here on this rice lake. This is the reason we're here, is because of this rice. We fought over this rice to live here.
What Leland is referring to is the Battle of Mole Lake, a clash between native tribes that killed 500 people in 1806.
People were getting pushed from the east to the west, and Lakota happened to be some of them, Sioux happened to be some of them, we happened to be some of them, but our people just never left, and they weren't going to leave this area because this is where the spirits told us to stay.
It's essential that the lake has a constant supply of fresh water to avoid any sediment buildup, which would prevent nutrients from reaching the rice plants. As custodians of the lake, local harvesters do what they can to manage this natural resource.
this water isn't always at this level. The creek down here, we got a dam in the water that we build every year, and so we can bring the water up.
The same grain, but domesticated by farmers and grown in paddies, can now be found at a fraction of the cost and is often mislabeled as wild rice. But for the Ojibwe tribe, naturally grown Manoomin has a value that can't be easily counted in dollars and cents.
What people know as wild rice is not what we call it. We call it Manoomin, and it's the good seed or the good food. And people say that it's wild, but it was put here for a purpose for us.
This small blue gemstone is one of the rarest in the world. And because of the unique way it forms in the earth, benitoite sparkles even brighter than diamonds, making it incredibly expensive. A single carat can cost over $12,000. But you can only really find this gem in one place. So why is benitoite so hard to find? And what makes it so expensive?
How is benitoite different from other gemstones? It has a brighter vitreous luster.
That means it looks like glass, but brighter, shinier. It also has a high dispersion, or fire, meaning it can sparkle more than other gemstones.
So, here we are on the top of the mine.
This is a private mine. It's part of Benitoite Mining Company, owned by John and Dave Schreiner. The company is stationed here because facet-grade benitoite can be found in only one location, San Benito County, California. That's why it's the state's gem.
There have been microscopic deposits found in Japan, but so far this is the only place where you can find it where it's actually big enough to hold in your hand and to put in jewelry.
Not knowing how rare it was, miners used to extract benitoite just like any other gem, with explosions and blunt force. And now, the supply is finite. Gemstones like benitoite are generally scattered, but sometimes there's a vein underground where concentrated amounts of the gem collect. Benitoite formed when an oceanic plate and a crustal plate came together. One plate slid under the other and water got trapped in the fault line. Magma then intruded into the fault line and mixed with the trapped water. As cracks and veins formed in the surrounding rock, the superheated mixture flowed into them. Here, the rare element barium bound with titanium, silica, and other elements. Together, they formed benitoite. But finding the gem is a bit of a guessing game, and if John and Dave guess incorrectly, the cost is high. To help them find where benitoite might be, they look for this. The white part of the rock is nitrolite, and the dark part, blue schist. These are two minerals that surround and protect benitoite. If they see the white, it may mean they found a benitoite vein. And when the vein breaks out onto the surface, it's referred to as an outcrop.
A big vein or a big outcrop of benitoite was right here, and it had fallen against the mountain. That was dug out, dynamited, all the material off the top of it's gone. That doesn't mean there's not stones here. They're all over the place.
Yet a benitoite vein hasn't been found here since the late 1990s. So today, John and Dave are mining in a location they think has potential. They have to narrow down where they think the vein is, because excavating and drilling is expensive, and they can't afford to be wrong. Core drilling alone will cost them $200,000.
Funding is always an issue. Mining is not a cheap venture. Normally that's what's holding us back, just having the funds to actually move forward.
So as they work up to that funding, they're also working to confirm exactly where the vein is. After they load all the material they excavated, they can begin processing it to see if there's a concentration of benitoite. That starts with sorting.
This is the first stage of the wash plant. Right over here is where the material gets dumped in originally. So everything above 1.5 inches gets stopped right there.
After this, John can locate larger specimens that need to be acid etched, where acid is used to carefully break off the benitoite from its surroundings. They also screen for everything under an 1/8 inch, and the sorted material goes up a long conveyor belt to be washed in the trammel. The trammel shakes and cleans the rocks before they hit the blacklight room. Benitoite is fluorescent, so the Shriners use UV light to identify the gem without damaging it. After, he screens and washes all the fluorescent pieces and collects the best ones.
There's one of them. That is a benitoite.
Even though John found some good pieces of benitoite, today's excavation was just okay.
This is good. We've done better.
Still, he and Dave remain hopeful. They're confident that they're getting really close to locating that vein.
Finding another benitoite vein would be outstanding. It would change a lot of things. That is the direction we're going in and that we want to go in. It's financially hindering, but we are getting there.
But even if John and Dave find a vein, it doesn't mean all the benitoite they excavate can be sold for top dollar. Benitoite is a naturally small gem, like diamonds, so most of the rocks they find can't be faceted into a clean, clear gem.
On average, you lose about 80% of the stone during the cutting process. It also depends on how clean you want the stone to be.
But the remarkable and highly valuable properties of benitoite make all this work worth it.
What's also very unique about benitoite is that it is doubly refractive. So when the light enters the stone, it splits into 2 rays.
This creates a doubling effect, giving benitoite a complex internal appearance. Yet on the surface, it looks like light bounces off the gem on all sides. The depth these qualities create is enriched by the stone's color, which shows in the price.
In a colored gemstone is color. Color, color, color is the first and last and most important factor affecting value in a colored gemstone. And depth also holds the color. Like a deeper stone can have a deeper color, and that makes it more valuable. The darker the color, the more valuable the stone typically is.